Okay, it's 7:01 Eastern time by my clock, or 1 minute past the hour, wherever you may happen to be in the country. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here taking steps to improve your own health and being proactive about your health. Sorry if you're here because you're feeling anxious. We know this is a really common problem, but I'll do my best over the next 45 minutes or so to share information with you that's practical news you can use to help you find relief naturally from anxiety. Feel free to type questions into the Q&A area as we go along. I won't be able to watch the chat too much, if at all, while I'm presenting, because that ends up being distracting. But do type questions into the Q&A area if you have them. I did see one message in the chat about whether this presentation will be available with closed captioning. I don't know, and I don't think so. If anybody from Healthy Planet is on the line in terms of technical aspects, maybe they can address that or try to get that going. I'm not aware of how to activate that feature if it's a possibility. All right, so without further ado, let us get started with this evening's presentation about how we can find relief naturally and find our calm even in the face of anxiety. We know this is an incredibly common problem. There are lots of people on the line tonight, and that speaks to the severity or how widespread this issue is of anxiety. In 2020, 46% of Canadians polled, according to StatsCan, reported feeling anxious or worried. Now, maybe 2020 wasn't a good time to ask this question, but certainly even before that, rates of anxiety were very high. It was, even prior to the pandemic, considered to be the most common neurological disorder in North America. Now, normally I would run a poll, as it says on the bottom right corner, but I'm having trouble activating the polls in terms of who has anxiety. I presume that everybody on the line is here because they have anxiety regularly or occasionally, or know somebody who tends to feel anxious or nervous. Anxiety, of course, often takes the form of worrying about things that might happen or might not happen. Versus, for example, depression, it's the flip side of that coin, and that often takes the form of ruminating or feeling bad, low mood about the past, thing that's happened in the past, whereas anxiety is more like feeling anxious, nervous, or fearful of what could happen. People can have anxiety, depression, or both. They often come hand in hand or flip-flop, but certainly anxiety is not a fun way to live. There are different types of anxiety. We know, depending on what triggers it, if it tends to be social situations or other types of triggers for anxiety that can happen, if it's all the time or just under certain circumstances. So there are specific solutions for specific types of anxiety, but I'm going to cover information that covers broader, anxiety in terms of its broad forms. First of all, before we proceed, it's important to be aware of some underlying physiological causes of anxiety that should be ruled out, or at least people should be aware of. For example, having low iron, and by that I mean a ferritin under 50 micrograms per liter. So when people get their iron levels checked, first of all, they may not get their ferritin levels checked. And a ferritin level is like a backup form of iron storage, and it can be an early warning system of low iron. But many people aren't told, especially women, that low iron is a problem unless their ferritin is under 20 or even under 15. It's really low at that point. But even under 50 micrograms per liter, this level of low iron can be contributing to mood and anxiety. So get your iron levels checked, or if they're low, get them back up. It can also help with mood and sleep and feeling cold, tired. There's all kinds of symptoms associated with low iron, but anxiety is one of them. Low progesterone, temporarily, a lot of women will experience anxiety or feeling more anxious right before their period, because that's a time when progesterone tends to drop. But also during perimenopause, is a time when progesterone can be low on an ongoing basis or erratic, and that can contribute to anxiety. So that's worth checking out. Hyperthyroid, overactive thyroid, as well as some types of heart health conditions, as well as certain types of prescription medications. Ones for ADHD, corticosteroids can also sometimes have this effect. Basically, if you're on any type of prescription medication, it's worthwhile checking with your doctor, or it's sometimes easier to check with your pharmacist as to whether anxiety may be a side effect of the medication. So just be aware of these things. Okay. So before we go into nutritional solutions to help with anxiety, let's talk about a few foundational approaches to helping to deal with anxiety. The first one on the top of this list is RX physical exercise. That means prescription physical exercise. So think of physical exercise as a prescription when it comes to any kind of mood disorder, whether it's low mood or anxiety. Nothing replaces exercise in terms of being a mood booster and something that can help calm us. Just in its very most basic sense, exercise can help boost the production of feel-good hormones, things like serotonin, for example, as well as being very calming. And so do think of it as a prescription if you have low mood or anxiety. Regular physical exercise, so getting moving every day, ideally 20 to 30 minutes of vigorous physical exercise, as much as you can handle in that time, is ideal. The next one, this seems obvious and kind of a no-brainer, but in fact, breathing and mindfulness exercises and these kinds of relaxation exercises actually have been shown to change the brain physically in ways that can help improve mood. So the part of the brain that tends to be overactive or overactivated when we have anxiety is called the amygdala. This is a part of the brain that's responsible for fear and anxiety. Now, it's important to have an amygdala because it prevents us from doing dumb things, and it can save us because it causes us to feel fearful when we're, say, on the edge of a cliff, for example. Keeps us from jumping off a cliff for fun. So it's important to have an amygdala, but the amygdala can become overactive and we're feeling too anxious about too many things too often when we don't need to be. So breathing and mindfulness practices have been shown to cause a shrinking of the amygdala, like a healthy shrinking of the amygdala, and an increase in other areas of the brain, literally helping to grow new brain cells in areas of the brain that help you feel calmer and are associated with, say, improved memory, for example. This is really important. So regular breathing and mindfulness practices can help change the brain in positive ways. And then third, cognitive behavioral therapy. So the CBT is a form of brief therapy. Typically, it takes the form of, it can be, 8, 10, 12 sessions, for example. And CBT, I'll actually put this back for a second, doesn't, usually delve into your childhood, for example. That's not what it's about. But it's looking at how you are thinking about certain things and how that may be affecting how you feel and then how you act, which then in turn can affect your thinking and feeling again. And this goes around in what can be an unhelpful loop. So for example, sometimes when we're anxious, to give you an example, if you feel like you're anxious about something, take a moment to stop and think, okay, do I know what I'm anxious about? Because sometimes you feel anxious and, you don't necessarily know what triggered it. If you can, go inwards, take a moment, think, oh yeah, it was that conversation I had with my sister where she's worried about whatever, something triggered, maybe I owe her money, who knows? Just think if there was something throughout the day or recently that triggered it. Sometimes you can identify, yes, this is the thing that made me anxious, or sometimes you can't. And that's okay, just being aware of that is important. whether or not you can identify. And if you can identify, you can think, okay, what is making me anxious about this situation? What is the worst possible thing that can happen in this particular situation? And sometimes the worst possible thing that can happen is pretty bad if you really let your mind go, but that bad thing is very unlikely to happen. So you can keep that in mind. Or sometimes the very worst thing that can happen, you realize is not so bad. And so these are ways of sort of examining your thinking about certain situations. So that's sort of brief ways of, in the moment, trying to apply broad stroke CBD type techniques. Even more helpful are like CBT courses. So you can take these online, for example. Here's one offered by the CMHA, so Canadian Mental Health Association. Living Life to the Full, 12 hours that can change your life. So it's a 12-hour course, which I believe is broken down into 8 weeks, so 8 90-minute classes. And it gives people the tools to apply CBD to help understand their thoughts that can impact their well-being. This can be so profoundly helpful. And it's just worthwhile, I think, for most people, if you're struggling with mood in any way, anxiety or low mood, really so useful. It's offered in many types of different languages. The courses run on an ongoing basis. And it's a great thing to be aware of. So you can check that out at the CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association website, or just Google Living Life to the Full, and you'll be able to find access to this course. It's fantastic. Okay, so those are basic things. Exercise, breathing and mindfulness, CBD techniques can be real game changers when it comes to anxiety after we've ruled out possible physiological underlying causes for feelings of nervousness. Okay, so next let's talk about nutrition for mood, and we'll talk about general nutrition to begin with, and then we'll talk about certain specific nutrients that can really make a difference in terms of mood in general and anxiety in particular. So when we look at nutrition for an optimal mood, I know there's lots of information on this slide, but basically when we're thinking about diet, first of all, there's certain common sense things, not too much caffeine. You'd be amazed at how people who feel anxious, jittery, not sleeping, and they're drinking 8 cups of coffee per day, or drinking coffee, late into the day. Don't underestimate the effect that caffeine can have on feelings of anxiety. It really can cause jitteriness and anxiety. And so keep that in mind. I mean, I'm not against coffee or caffeine, but it has its place typically in the morning, and I'll explain ways later how you can balance the effects of caffeine. Not too much alcohol. Alcohol seems to create more of a problem with low mood. It can certainly be a depressant. It can also change the microbiome in a way that can affect your mood. But, often depression and anxiety are, come hand in hand. And so that's something to keep in consideration. And then after that, you want to eat in a way that stabilizes your blood sugar. So this is important because if we have blood sugar that's up and down, sort of on a roller coaster all day, which many of us do, when blood sugar, we all know high blood sugar is not a good thing. Everybody knows that, but it doesn't feel bad. When blood sugar starts to drop, then it actually can trigger the production of stress hormones in the body that can make you feel more anxious. So anybody's ever felt hangry, that's because when blood sugar is dropping fast, the body will produce adrenaline, and that's an emergency blood sugar raising tactic, but it can make you feel irritable and for some people jittery. So blood sugar that's up and down all day long is not helpful for mood, especially anxiety. So decreasing refined carbohydrates, especially at breakfast, minimizing your intake of things like white flour, white sugar, breakfast, sugary breakfast cereals, muffins, bagels, all of those kinds of foods will cause your blood sugar to spike and then be up and down all day long, which is no good for your mood and for anxiety. So instead, better breakfast would be, say, eggs, full fat Greek yogurt, maybe with some nuts and seeds in there for fiber. You want fiber, fat, and protein at each meal, but especially at the beginning of the day. Now, if you're doing intermittent fasting, that's okay. It's not when you eat, but it's what you eat to break your fast. So, an omelet, vegetable omelet with maybe veggies and cheese in your omelet, or a protein smoothie that has protein, fat, and fiber. These are all ways to start your day that keep your blood sugar stable. And eating regular meals. So for some people, if they go too long without eating, again, blood sugar drops that can contribute to anxiety. So those are overall recommendations in terms of diet for a better mood. It's really one that keeps blood sugar stable by avoiding refined carbs and having a variety of whole foods, protein, fat, and fiber at each meal, as well as not having too much caffeine. Don't underestimate the effects that caffeine has on anxiety, as well as poor sleep. Okay, so the next two things I'll talk about are some key foundational nutrients. So above and beyond a healthy diet, which key nutrients will help our mood and specifically help combat anxiety? Then third is nutraceutical therapy. So where can we apply specific nutrients strategically to help with our mood, either in the moment or over a longer period of time? Okay, so first of all, in terms of a foundational nutrient is magnesium. The benefits of magnesium can't be overemphasized in some ways. This is just a snapshot of a review called the effects of magnesium supplementation on subjective stress and anxiety, so how people feel about that. Magnesium is, you've probably heard it, well, I don't know if you've heard that Psychology Today magazine called it the original chill pill. You probably have heard that it's used for hundreds of reactions in the body. And it certainly is a mineral that is relaxing, calming. It helps to relax muscles, muscle cramps, muscle twitches. It helps to maintain healthy blood pressure. It can be, taken at any time, day or night when we talk about supplements, but especially nice at night to improve sleep quality. So it really is an important nutrient for all kinds of aspects of health, but as well for mood and specifically to be an anxiety buster. If you are anxious and not getting enough magnesium, that could be why. So how much magnesium do we need to take in? A lot, actually. So the recommended magnesium intake, according to Health Canada, so this is the minimum amount of magnesium we need to prevent magnesium deficiency and to meet all of the magnesium we need for the hundreds of different reactions it's doing in the body. For adults, and I mean people 14 years and older. So if you're on here and you're 14 years and older, you need, well, it says for males, 410 milligrams per day. That's just the minimum amount. And females, 360 milligrams per day. Frankly, I think they base that difference on differences in body size. And I think females need just as much as males. And so for, rule of thumb, easy math, for adults, so that says people 14 plus, so adolescents and adults, 400 milligrams of magnesium per day. That is the bare minimum we need, and we probably need more when we're under stress. And the fact is, if we don't have enough, there's going to be problems, and anxiety can be one of those. Adolescents between 9 and 13, this is actually preteens, 240 milligrams per day, and then children 4 to 8 years, 130 milligrams of magnesium per day. So that's not that easy to get. There's a chart on the side of a few foods, common foods, and their magnesium content per 100 grams. So we're looking at 4 ounces of these foods. So there aren't very many that are high in magnesium. Green leafy vegetables, now that is, you'll get more cooked. So if you were to eat 2 cups of cooked spinach, that would give you approximately 300 milligrams of magnesium. So you could get this from cooked greens. Spinach is the highest, cooked spinach. But cooked kale, the raw stuff, my goodness, you'd have to eat mountains of it. 100 grams of raw spinach is a big pile of spinach. Dark chocolate. Now, this is something high in magnesium, 146 milligrams per 100 grams of dark chocolate. So it does, you probably have heard magnesium is high in dark chocolate. That is true. Nuts and seeds, things like almonds and hazelnuts, they have a respectable amount of magnesium. There's some debate as to how much magnesium you are absorbing from them. Certainly, if you're having them either ground up in an almond butter or soaked or sprouted, yes, you're absolutely releasing the magnesium for absorption. There are phytates in nuts and seeds, the ones that prevent them from sprouting. The reason why we can store nuts and seeds for so long is because they contain these anti-nutrients that lock up the minerals until they are activated by water. And so there's some debate as to how much magnesium we're absorbing from those foods. But still something good to keep in your diet: nuts, seeds, and green leafy vegetables, and some dark chocolate. Still, though, I would think it's going to be challenging for most people to meet even the recommended daily intake. And, it's hard to, if you aren't getting at least the minimum amount of magnesium, that will affect your mood and can contribute to anxiety. Okay, so we know there are lots of magnesium supplements on the market. And as I mentioned, with some effort and really careful planning, you may be able to meet your magnesium intake through foods. But if not, then a magnesium supplement can be really helpful. There are two main types we'll see on the market: magnesium citrate and magnesium bisglycinate. They both work. Magnesium citrate is a little less expensive. I often call it cheap and cheerful. It is consistently effective. I have no problems with magnesium citrate. Some people find it hard on their digestion and can cause loose stools. So just be aware of that. More popular now because of that reason is magnesium bisglycinate. This form is easy on the stomach, and it does not cause any type of digestive upset. It has all the same benefits that we want from magnesium. So magnesium bisglycinate, you can get this in a powdered form as well as in vegetarian capsules. 1 to 2 of those a day. If you're making efforts to get magnesium in through your diet, maybe you'll be able to meet your recommended intake with one of these. If not, then 2 capsules per day. You can split that up, 1 at night, 1 in the morning. And again, I really do like taking this at night because it helps with a nice, peaceful, relaxing sleep. So really, this is I would say the most important foundational nutrient above and beyond a healthy diet in terms of anxiety would be magnesium. Okay, next is somehow. Okay, don't know what happened there, but all right. Next, we're going to talk about fermented foods. This is really interesting. Studies show that eating more fermented foods is associated with less anxiety. This is odd, but there are a few fairly large-scale studies have found this association. And this is, interesting. When we talk about fermented foods, what do I mean? Well, there's some examples here. There's some yogurt and kefir, kombucha in the glass. Looks like beer. Beer, of course, is also a fermented food, but not necessarily one I'd recommend for anxiety. Some kimchi, sauerkraut, also things like sourdough bread. These are foods that are much more common in other parts of the world and other cultures, and much less common in the Western diet. Let me think. Apple cider vinegar and other types of vinegars, for example, those also count as fermented foods. So working to get more of these fermented foods into our diet, it looks like studies show can make an important benefit for our mood and can help reduce anxiety. And well, how could this be? It turns out that there is a superhighway connecting our intestines to our brain, something called the gut-brain axis. So in fact, a lot of the chemicals that we think of as feel-good chemicals like serotonin, for example. 90% of the serotonin that we make in our gut, in our gastrointestinal tract. We think of this as a brain hormone, and it sure is, but we make 90% of it in our gut. There are other ones too, GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. I'll talk about that more shortly. This is a natural calming neurotransmitter, and we make this in our intestines. You can get it from some types of fermented foods. I'll talk about that shortly. So a healthy microbiome in your gastrointestinal tract is something that will help produce beneficial compounds that have benefits on our mood, whereas an imbalanced, unhealthy microbiome, something called dysbiosis, where you don't have enough of the beneficial bacteria, the less beneficial bacteria are overcrowding the good guys, then that absolutely can affect mood. And so one way to keep the good guys up and a beneficial balance in your microbiome is by eating fermented foods. So, either you can buy them pre-made or experiment with making your own. There's a lot of different and delicious ones out there. And it may require some getting used to in terms of the tangy flavor, but they're easy to incorporate into your diet, even just little bits here and there as sort of like condiments and side dishes. So consider more fermented food in your diet. Also, eating lots of fiber is a way to feed the good bacteria that are already in the gut. Okay, so speaking of beneficial bacteria, there are a couple of strains of probiotics. Of course, we know that fermented foods provide beneficial bacteria, so probiotics in terms of food. And we know that certain strains of probiotics have been identified as, in fact, having the ability to moderate feelings of anxiety. So there are specific strains of probiotics that have been shown to go into the gastrointestinal tract and produce calming neurotransmitters, things like GABA, for example, that I mentioned earlier, that I'll talk about a little bit more later. So Combiotic is an example of a two-strain formula, and it is one that has been shown clinically to moderate feelings of anxiety when taken on a daily, taken on a daily basis. Okay, just checking some notes, whether somebody commented they couldn't see the, the pictures here. Also, the Combiotic has been shown to help relieve stress-related gastrointestinal complications like nausea and abdominal pain. So for some people, when they get stressed, it goes straight to their gut. So abdominal pain, gastric upset, for example, that's how the stress manifests for them. And this has also been shown to relieve the gastrointestinal complications of stress. So this is something that would be taken on a daily basis. This box, for example, contains 30 vegetarian capsules, so a month's supply, no refrigeration required. It's just 3 billion strains, 3 billion live probiotic cultures in here, two-strain formula, but it's those specific strains in this combination that you won't find in other general probiotic combinations that have been shown to have this effect. So the effect is noticeable. Usually for most people, it takes a few days of taking this on an ongoing basis to experience or see the difference. And I would call it noticeable or subtle, but noticeable. And it's something that can help address the roots of anxiety in terms of the gastrointestinal aspect of it. So this is just something to keep in mind above and beyond a healthy diet, is the Combiotic, because it contains 2 special strains of probiotic bacteria for mood. Okay, so let's move on to some nutraceuticals. In other words, specific nutrients that are helpful in the moment. So I've talked about some, dietary advice, some foundational nutrients like magnesium, as well as Combiotic, for example. But what about in the moment? what can we do for, some of the acute anxiety or acute nervousness that we can get? We know that the mental symptoms of stress and anxiety can manifest with symptoms like lack of concentration and focus, memory lapses, difficulty in making decision, confusion, even panic attacks for some people, certainly feeling nervous, and a mind that races at bedtime that you can't shut down. And so this is I think everybody's had this experience. On the left, she's at work, but she's thinking about being at home in bed. And on the right, she's at home in bed, but she's thinking about being at work. And this has happened to everybody at some point in time. And there are things we can do in the moment. Everything else I have talked about so far, I would say, is more foundational, medium to long-term help. But there are some instant relief that we can get from anxiety with certain nutrients. Before I get to that, let me show you this. When we talk about being anxious, there are certain characteristic brain waves that can reveal our state of mind, depending on what's going on in our brain, how our brain is acting, what state we may be in. The brain is producing certain electrical activity, so brain waves that can be monitored through things like EEG, for example. And on the top line here, delta wave. This is these sort of infrequent, deep amplitude, kind of erratic looking waves are characteristic of deep sleep. And then the next line, we have theta waves. These are a little bit less deep in amplitude, a little bit more frequent. They look a little bit more like waking waves, but these are characteristic of light sleep. You may also get into theta waves when you're daydreaming. Or if you've ever had the experience where you're driving in your car and all of a sudden you look up and think, oh, what happened to the last 3 exits? How did I get here? You were probably in theta state, that kind of daydreaming sort of state. An interesting fun fact, your hippocampus was paying attention to the road while you weren't, and it took over the driving for you. At the bottom of the chart here, there's beta waves. So these are actually quite flat. And this is characteristic of when we're awake and excited. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail. There are different types of beta waves. They're not all bad, but something called high beta is awake and very excitable, anxious, a fight or flight type situation happening in the brain. And people who are feeling anxious are often more in an unhealthy or high beta wave type state. Now, the third line, this is the sweet spot. This is ideally where we would like to be. These are alpha waves. You can see the waves are quite regular in their frequency. They're moderate and also fairly consistent in their amplitude. And these are the brain waves when we are awake but relaxed. So some people call this in flow or a meditative state. Basically, when you're calm, focused, even creative, people are in the alpha wave state. And so definitely when you're feeling anxious, you aren't having a lot of alpha brain waves happening. So what can we do to help get there? Well, L-theanine is an amino acid that was originally identified in green tea. That's where the name comes from. Thea comes from tea. And L-theanine has been shown to increase alpha brain waves. And so you can't get this from drinking a high quality, usually a matcha green tea, like, that like emerald green type powder. Of course, those also have caffeine in them, so you do have to watch out with green tea. But L-theanine can be extracted from green tea or made through a fermentation process more commonly. And it has been used as a treatment for anxiety and nervousness, sleep disturbances like difficulty getting to sleep because of that overactive, tired and wired brain, PMS, so people who feel anxious before the period, ADHD, school-age kids with ADHD, weight control, cravings due to smoking cessation, for example, poor concentration. They've even done studies on L-theanine and golfing, showing that L-theanine supplementation can help improve driving distance and putting accuracy because it helps to calm and focus the mind, so you're not overthinking it. So L-theanine is something that is available on its own, so without the caffeine, so made through a natural fermentation process. There's certain types of bacteria which will produce L-theanine, and you can then put this into a tablet or capsule. And this is something that can be taken. It does not it does not cause drowsiness, but it can be taken as needed for fairly fast acting, especially the chewable tablets, fast acting relief from feelings of nervousness or anxiety. If you're not feeling particularly anxious and you take one of these, you probably won't notice much. But if you're feeling anxious and you take one, you will likely notice feeling more calm within 15 minutes. And the effect can last usually a few hours. So it promotes deep relaxation, mental clarity, relaxation, focus, without being habit forming, without causing drowsiness, and without having drug interactions. So it's one chewable tablet as needed. This is mental calmness, so it's L-theanine 100% in a tablet. And one chewable tablet as needed. So take it, when you feel those feelings of anxiousness or over busyness even, but you don't need to take it, on an every day unless you feel like it. It's very safe, can be taken safely long-term, and typically one tablet. There is an extra strength version in capsules that is 250 milligrams. You could certainly safely take more. I do know somebody who inadvertently took a whole bottle because it was in a bowl and they thought it was vitamin C. Absolutely very safe. Not that you need to take that much, but the point is that this is something that has a high safety rating. So this is something to keep in mind, whether you're at work trying to stay positive, or to keep in mind, in the glove compartment or in your office desk, just for, I would say, mild to moderate fast relief from feelings of anxiety. Okay. There is a lot of interesting research. So I mentioned before that I'm not completely down on caffeine. Yes, absolutely, too much caffeine can make you feel anxious, can interfere with your sleep. But if you feel a bit over-caffeinated and jittery, L-theanine and caffeine have been studied together to show positive changes on cognitive function, improved speed and accuracy on attention switching tasks, reduced distractibility on memory tasks. We know that caffeine has positive effects on our cognition, but the downside is it can make us feel jittery. And so L-theanine balances that out. You can actually find L-theanine in canned coffee drinks in Asia. It's a very common combination. So again, I'm not encouraging you to abuse caffeine, but if you've had some and you're feeling anxious and jittery, you can try some L-theanine to help take the edge off of that. Okay, there's one other nutraceutical solution I'm going to share with you in terms of fast-acting relief acutely from feelings of nervousness that works very similarly, almost identical to L-theanine. They're actually biochemical cousins, these two natural compounds, but this one is stronger, and that's GABA. Gamma-aminobutyric acid. I've already mentioned this a couple times. It is the most important and abundant inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. So we do make this in the body, as I mentioned, we make it in the gastrointestinal tract, and it's a neurotransmitter, an amino acid neurotransmitter that helps to calm us down. So inhibitory means calming, and works by the same mechanism of L-theanine, only this tends to be stronger. And GABA also is available. It can be made through a fermentation process and then put into chewable tablets or capsules. This 100% natural GABA in the Stress Relax line here is made through a fermentation process. It's something called naturally produced pharma-GABA. Now, when GABA was first introduced to the market, GABA supplements, it was a synthetic source, and that is still, you can still find some of those on the market. The synthetic GABAs, they can work for some people, but for other people, they don't, or they work sometimes and not others, or they're unpredictable in their effects, or they can have unusual side effects. The 100% natural GABA is quite consistent in its effect. no strange side effects, and again, not habit forming, no drug interactions, and does not cause drowsiness. And this can be taken one chewable tablet as needed for acute nervousness and stress. Most people will take one tablet. There are extra strength formulas with more GABA in them available, but for most people, one tablet will take the edge off their nervousness for a few hours. I knew one individual who was extremely anxious and prone to panic attacks, and he would take 3 of these 3 times a day. And that's how he managed his extreme anxiety, which is okay. It's absolutely safe to do so, but for most people, you won't need that much. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, taken as needed, and you can keep it on hand for when you think you need it. There have been, there's been quite a bit of interesting clinical research in terms of GABA. The study they used, PharmaGABA, they took people with a fear of heights and had them cross a suspension bridge over a very high canyon and stopped them in the middle to take things like blood pressure and saliva samples for, to see how stressed they were. They had groups that they gave PharmaGABA to, as well as those who took a placebo. And those who took the PharmaGABA showed less signs of stress compared to people who took the placebo, as well as compared to people who never even crossed the bridge and who weren't afraid of heights. And so quite ruthless, these researchers, but a great way to test whether PharmaGABA really works and helps with anxiety. And so interesting to see the kind of research that goes into these sort of nutrients. Okay, so one more thing that I want to mention here. We know that sometimes if you're anxious, you have difficulty sleeping, and it happens to be that there is a new combination on the market that contains all of the nutrients I have mentioned so far, plus melatonin, which is just for nighttime. So this particular combination, the nighttime magnesium bisglycinate, this provides L-theanine, PharmaGABA, magnesium bisglycinate, as well as melatonin. So this is why it's for nighttime use only. And it's in a powdered formula that's fast acting and easy to mix. It's, the dosing is flexible. You can do 1 scoop, half a scoop, 2 scoops, but it combines those nutrients that I mentioned, 3 of these nutrients I've already mentioned, the L-theanine, PharmaGABA, and magnesium. And it's a really nice way to help get a lot of deep sleep at the beginning of the night, which has been shown to be helpful for cognitive function, as well as the melatonin. It's a relatively small amount, 2.5 milligrams per scoop, helps with staying asleep later in the night. So just to keep in mind, I know lots of people who are anxious aren't sleeping well, and this is a new combination that combines many of the relaxing nutrients that I already mentioned, but this one is for nighttime use only. So the combination here, I talk about deep sleep, and I said that it makes a benefit for cognitive function. We know that sleep happens in different phases in the night. When we first fall asleep, for our first 2 sleep cycles, approximately, let's say if you're going to bed at 10, between about 10 and say 2, 3 in the morning, we're spending most of that time in what's called deep or 4th stage sleep. This is a very deep form of sleep where we didn't really know until recently what, if anything, was happening. We now know that during this deep phase of sleep, there is a circulatory system that turns on the brain, not blood, but cerebrospinal fluid that flushes out the brain. We literally clean our brains during this 4th stage of sleep, which is one reason why you wake up, or you should wake up, feeling more refreshed the next day after you sleep. You've cleaned your brain, literally. So if you're not sleeping well, if you're under stress, you're not getting to deep sleep, or you have high blood pressure or high levels of alcohol, all of that can interfere with deep sleep and the activation of this circulatory system, which can interfere with effective brain clearance. Whoops, go back here. This, by the way, is from a journal article called if I can move my thing here, achieving brain clearance and preventing neurodegenerative diseases, a glymphatic perspective, published in the Journal of Cerebral Blood Flow and Metabolism. It's super interesting information, but we now know that we clean our brains at night. And new information also shows that a combination, so previously I talked about GABA and L-theanine as being an either or, which during the day for anxiety, it certainly is. But the sleep formula I mentioned, GABA and L-theanine together, these have been shown to improve deep sleep. It decreases sleep latency, in other words, helps you get to sleep faster, but specifically improve that deep sleep where we're cleaning our brains. So we definitely know this has potential to be very beneficial for cognitive function and potentially for mood. And so something to keep in mind. Okay, so last but not least, this brings us up to time, 45 minutes. And sometimes people ask, how do I know I'm getting a good natural health product? It's worthwhile looking somewhere on the label for this Ishura symbol, and you can also check out the website ishura.ca. This is testing that goes above and beyond strict Canadian guidelines to make sure products are non-GMO compliant, accurately labeled, authenticated, non-adulterated, and testing for over 700 different contaminants. So this is something to look for and in the website even that you can check out to see the kinds of like CSI type testing, which is being done on supplements. Okay, so that brings us up to time, and it looks like there's lots of questions in the chat. Of course, Healthy Planet, you've always got lots of questions. So let me see if I can open the chat, the Q&A area here.